Derren Brown has delighted audiences with his mind-blowing magic.
But in a thought-provoking new book, he's giving readers an insight into his own life, and he explores some of the world's biggest questions.
And he's here to explain more now. And this is the book, Finding Solace in a Stubborn World, a book of secret... We said this is one of the nicest book covers we've probably ever seen.
It's a fine book cover, I can take no credit for that.
Shiny,
yeah, it is very
shiny. So this is not a self-help book, but you say you should embrace uncertainty.
Yeah, well, we've been told for a long time that in order to feel happy and feel satisfied, we should set our goals and we should believe in ourselves, and the universe will somehow provide. And the trouble is you can only judge any philosophy on how well it serves you when things go badly. And the trouble with that is that when things do go badly, you've only got yourself to blame. You've let yourself down. You've failed in some way. And I think that's just it's silly, because it's part of the nature of life that it doesn't always go as planned. So what interests me is how we can make our peace with a world that doesn't do what it's told, and maybe find places for compassion and so on within that.
Well, it starts right at the very beginning, actually, with a story of you at the age of 15 and a story of you being bullied, actually. Yes. And what's really interesting is what that moment that can be devastating for any child to go through something like that, but it's what you learnt in that moment and what you've taken from it.
Yes, exactly. So I wasn't horribly bullied at school at all, but I definitely had my moments. I was clearly a bit of a magnet for it, and I got beaten up on this Duke of Edinburgh Awards trip when I was 15, and then years later, and this is only maybe a year or two ago, I found out that the guy that did it he'd grown up, had a brain hemorrhage. That had led to a horrible depression. He then tried to take his own life and mess that up and cause further damage to his brain. And it just, it was just such a mess. And I'd carried around for years just this story in my head of this guy being a bully. I'm sure he had his story about me too. And suddenly it really hit home how the stories that we tell ourselves about the world and other people just don't really measure up to reality. There's all this other stuff that goes on. The nature of stories, that we live life through stories, don't we? We have this infinite data source coming at us, so we have to turn it into a story so we can navigate it. But the nature of those, they're like little cosy things we tell around a campfire. And meanwhile, there's all this other stuff out there in the forest that we don't see, and that's where all the, all the monsters are, all the stuff that will come and own us unless we somehow sort of bring it into our sense of what the world is. And so, yeah, it ended up being a sort of dark but oddly sort of valuable thing.
So did being in lockdown, when you start looking at yourself and where you've been, what you've done, how you feel, your own anxieties, things like that, was that the trigger?
Well, I started the book before lockdown, and it was... its heart, I suppose, is and was the idea that things in life that make us feel most isolated. So when life, which has this centripetal magnetic pull to the centre, towards a difficult centre, we're always going to find ourselves there from time to time. And when we're in that place, it can feel very lonely and difficult and isolating. But it's also the time we're feeling the exact weight of life. So it's also the time we're most connected to the rest of humanity. Like this is the experience of life. So the book was about that, and then lockdown happened, which of course is this literal play out of exactly that idea. We're on the one hand isolated, and on the other hand all connected by that. So that was something to kind of then lean into and bring out more. It was, so yes, it did kind of provide a way of exploring those things.
And also your birthday, turning 50, you said that was a moment when you sort of had to reflect on what that meant for you, and sort of reaching a place of forgiveness a little bit. Yeah,
so that's an interesting thing, isn't it? It's like adolescence, I think, middle age, but we all look back on adolescence and sort of forgive it, but we don't feel the same about middle age. We're normally looking forward to it, as in it's ahead of us, so we don't have the benefit of hindsight. And I think and again, it's just a thing I write about in the book, I think there is a shift that should happen, and if we all had kind of roadmaps for life, we'd know this, but there's a shift that should happen. In the first half of life, we're staking our claim in the world, and we're saying, we want to be this, and we're looking at the outside world for our cues of what's right and wrong, and thinking about success and our reputation and so on. And then a shift occurs, or should occur, I think, around the second half, where we should look inwards and have a sense of how we sit with ourselves more than how we sit with the rest of the world. So paying attention to what brings us meaning in life, those things that are bigger than us, that we lose ourselves in and can bring us joy, which is partly asking ourselves, like, what's the path we're supposed to be on? We have so many broken compasses that we're given, you know, maps of the world that don't quite map up to reality, that we're given when we're young. Advice and pointers that we get to middle age and we realise they haven't quite come together in the way we expected. So what could we be like? What should we have been doing? What was the path if we hadn't? That's an interesting question to ask. What are the things that bring us pleasure in and of themselves in the moment, even if they're not leading to future success, which again we tend to be a bit obsessed with in the first half of life. And what can I serve? What are the things that are bigger than me? These
so
are
having written it and looked at yourself and looked at the world, I mean, are you in a particularly calm and wonderful, tranquil place now? Has it all come together in your head?
I think it's not about coming together. I think it's about how we live with the fact that things don't come together easily and the fact that there will always be anxiety. And maybe anxiety is a pointer. It's the only way we can grow is by accepting a certain amount of anxiety. And there's ways of dealing with too much of it. The Stoics had great lessons of only trying to control the things that we're in control of, which are essentially our thoughts and our actions, our intentions. And everything else, outcomes and what other people do, we can leave be and just focus on our own bit. And I think that's great advice for minimising unwanted anxiety. But I think also not seeing anxiety as the enemy either, and just allowing that this is part of the structure of life and seeing it as a pointer to growth. You know, you don't change your job or change your relationship unless you recognise anxiety as something that's useful and has something to tell you and a reason to change.
I think that would be really helpful for lots of people. One thing you couldn't control was the pandemic. When you were about to go out on tour, that all shut everything down, but you are back, aren't you?
Yes, I've started this tour. I've been on tour with Showman for a couple of months. I'm now on a bit of a break and it starts again in the spring, February, March. It's amazing being back out doing the ordinary stuff.
So different.
Amazing but different, yeah.
Yeah.
I couldn't get my head around the idea of a theatre of like a packed-out audience again and just going about all those daily things, let alone doing a show which now, of course, for the same reasons as with the book, I've been able to go back and lean into these same ideas. And so it's ended up being a show for this moment, I think, although it wasn't intended to be because it was written before lockdown happened. Yeah.
Thank you. It's always lovely to see you.
Yes,
this is Finding Solace in a Stubborn World. That's the book that we've been talking about. Thank you.
Thank you very
so much.
Lovely
Thank
to
you.
see you. Thank you.